the singing fog. The coastal town of Greyshore greeted me with an eerie silence. The trip was meant to be a brief escape, just a couple of days to clear my head and indulge in some writing. But Greyshore wasn't the kind of place you chose for relaxation. It was the kind of place that called to you, whispered your name in forgotten dreams, and left you wondering why you couldn't look away from its brooding cliffs and perpetual mist. I arrived on a windless, moonless night. The train station was barely more than a platform flanked by flickering lanterns. A driverless carriage waited for me, its engine purring softly, its windows fogged. I loaded my bags into the back, and as if it understood my unspoken command, it rolled off into the night, winding through narrow streets that seemed swallowed whole by the fog. The Greyshore Inn was a hunched, weather-beaten structure perched precariously above the sea. Its windows glimmered faintly, their lights dulled by the swirling mist. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and ancient dust. The innkeeper, a gaunt woman whose gray hair looked as though it had grown out of the fog itself, regarded me with a strange mixture of wariness and pity. "You'll be in room 3, she said, sliding a brass key across the counter. Her fingers were gnarled, her nails blackened at the edges. "Best keep the windows shut at night. The fog here, well, it carries things with it." I didn't ask what she meant, though her words settled in my chest like a stone. As I climbed the creaking stairs, the innkeeper called after me. "This came for you," she said, holding up a yellowed envelope. "Weeks ago." "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice catching. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. She said nothing, only placed the envelope on the counter and turned away. In my room, I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single slip of paper, the ink faded but legible. "Follow the song. Find the truth." I slept fitfully that night, the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs mingling with something stranger, a faint, lilting melody carried on the wind. I told myself it was a trick of my imagination, the kind of auditory mirage the mind conjures in unfamiliar places. But as the night wore on, the song grew louder, more insistent. It felt as though it was calling me. By 3 a.m, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my coat and ventured outside. The air was thick with mist, so dense that the world felt smothered. My flashlight cut only a few feet into the haze, illuminating cobblestones slick with moisture. The song floated in the air, ethereal and haunting, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. As I followed the melody, the streets of Greyshore took on an otherworldly quality. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision, figures perhaps, but when I turned my head, they vanished. Houses loomed like sentinels, their windows black and lifeless, their walls dripping with condensation. The melody led me to the edge of town, where the cliffs rose like jagged teeth above the roaring sea. A signpost loomed out of the mist, its wood splintered and its paint faded. Lighthouse. No entry. The song was louder now, almost deafening. It thrummed in my chest, worming its way into my thoughts. Ignoring the sign, I pressed on, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the fog. The lighthouse came into view suddenly, its dark silhouette cutting through the mist like a knife. Its windows glowed faintly, though no light shone from the tower above. The melody had taken on a sinister edge, its once lilting notes now warped and discordant. The door creaked open under my touch, revealing a spiral staircase that twisted into darkness. The air inside was colder, carrying the scent of brine and decay. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But the song had me now. The carvings began just a few steps in, symbols etched into the stone walls, crude and jagged. They seemed to shift when I looked at them, their edges pulsating faintly. Further up, the carvings grew more elaborate, forming shapes that resembled faces. Anguished, screaming faces. My pulse quickened. As I climbed, the song became clearer, as though it were emanating from just beyond the next bend. The stairs seemed endless, and I began to lose my sense of time, my steps echoing in the void. At last, I reached the top. The room was circular, lined with dust-covered furniture and forgotten relics. At its center was an ancient gramophone, its horn polished to a gleam. The record spun slowly, emitting the same melody I'd followed through the night. Beside it lay an open diary, its pages yellowed and brittle. I turned to the last entry, my hands trembling. The fog sings and we follow. It calls us to the edge, to the water. We go willingly, but we never return. The melody faltered and the gramophone ground to a halt. For the first time since stepping into the lighthouse, there was silence. For the first time since stepping into the lighthouse, there was silence. And then I heard it. A voice, low and resonant, whispering from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come." The whisper froze me in place. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I turned toward the source of the sound. The room was empty, or it should have been. Shadows danced along the stone walls, twisting and pooling unnaturally in the corners. The voice came again, a low murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't have come. Who's there?" My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. No answer. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint rasp of my own breathing. My flashlight flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment the room was plunged into darkness. When the beam returned, it caught something, a movement, slight but unmistakable. The shadows were shifting, coalescing into a shape. It was vaguely humanoid, but its edges shimmered and blurred as if the fog itself had bled into the room and taken form. Its face, or where a face should have been, was a hollow void, and yet I could feel its gaze piercing through me. The song began again, softly at first, but growing steadily louder. It wasn't coming from the gramophone anymore. It was coming from the figure. The diary on the table fluttered open, its pages turning as though caught in a phantom wind. Words began to appear on the blank spaces, scrawled in jagged, ink-black strokes. "You've heard the song. Now you are part of it." The figure took a step forward, its form wavering like smoke. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, nearly tripping over the gramophone. My flashlight flickered again, its beam faltering. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But it was real. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in. The symbols carved into the stone began to glow faintly, their edges pulsing with an otherworldly light. The figure raised an arm, long and spindly, its fingers ending in tendrils of mist. The song reached a deafening crescendo, the melody drilling into my skull. Desperation drove me to grab the gramophone. I hurled it at the figure, and for a brief moment, the song cut off. The figure dissolved into a swirl of fog, its form scattering like ash. The room was silent again, but the oppressive air remained. I turned to flee, but the staircase was gone. In its place was a spiraling tunnel of fog, stretching downward into darkness. My mind raced. I had to get out, but the only way forward was through the unknown. I descended, each step feeling like a lifetime. The walls of the tunnel pulsed with a sickly light, and faint whispers echoed around me. Fragments of the melody, warped and broken. The diary's words echoed in my mind. The fog sings, and we follow. We go willingly, but we never return. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a cacophony. Shapes moved in the fog, indistinct but undeniably there. Faces emerged, twisted, contorted, their mouths stretched into silent screams. They followed me, their movements jerky and unnatural. Then I heard it. My name, spoken in a voice that wasn't my own. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its walls slick with moisture and lined with more of the glowing symbols. At its center was a pool of water, dark and still, surrounded by jagged stones that jutted up like broken teeth. The song was loudest here, vibrating through the air, through the ground, through my very bones. I hesitated at the edge of the pool, my flashlight beam skittering across its surface. Something moved beneath the water, a ripple that seemed too deliberate to be natural. The figure reappeared, emerging from the fog like a wraith. This time there was no mistaking its intent. Its arms reached out, and the song twisted into a voice, deep, commanding, and impossibly ancient. Choose. Stay, and the song will take you, or silence it, and risk everything. What do you mean? I demanded, my voice trembling. The figure gestured to the pool. At its center, something shimmered, a small, dark object that seemed to pulse with the same light as the symbols on the walls. The diary's words returned to me. Break the record. End the song. Was this the record? The source of the melody that had haunted the town, luring its victims into the fog? If I destroyed it, would I break the curse? But the figure's words echoed in my mind. Risk everything. I stepped closer to the pool, the water lapping at the edges as if alive. The faces in the fog loomed closer, their mouths opening and closing soundlessly. I could feel their hunger, their desperation. Without thinking, I plunged my hand into the icy water. Pain shot through me, sharp and electric, as if the water itself was trying to consume me. My fingers closed around the object, a smooth, stone-like disc, and I pulled it free. The song faltered, its melody warping into discordant shrieks. The fog swirled violently, the faces in its depths contorting in agony. The figure let out a low, resonant howl, its form dissolving into tendrils of smoke. I raised the disc and brought it down against the jagged stones with all my strength. It shattered, and the song stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. The fog began to thin, retreating like a tide. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, a faint, haunting note rising from the water. The song wasn't over. The silence after the disc shattered was so absolute, it felt like the world had drawn a final breath. The fog writhed as though in pain, peeling back from the chamber in smoky tendrils. The faces dissolved, their anguished expressions vanishing into the gloom. The oppressive weight in the air began to lift, and for the first time, I thought I might live to see another sunrise. But then the water rippled. The pool, once still and reflective, now churned violently. The faint note I had heard, fragile, haunting, grew louder, layering itself into a melody. My chest tightened as I realized the song wasn't fading. It was returning. The jagged stones around the pool trembled, cracks forming along their surfaces. Light seeped from them, the same sickly glow that had pulsed through the symbols in the lighthouse. The chamber darkened and the fog surged back, enveloping me in an instant. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape. But the fog was alive now, tightening around me like a noose. The shattered pieces of the disc on the stone glimmered faintly, before melting into the ground as if absorbed. You thought it was that easy? The voice was everywhere. It vibrated in my skull, low and mocking, each word a dagger in my sanity. The fog condensed before me, forming shapes, more distinct now, no longer fleeting shadows. These were figures, human in outline but wrong in every other way. Their bodies were translucent, their faces featureless voids. They stood motionless, blocking every path of escape. The song reached a crescendo and the pool began to boil. Something was rising from its depths, a towering form of darkness and mist, its limbs impossibly long, its face a swirling vortex of fog and shadow. It radiated malevolence, the air around it vibrating with an almost electric charge. My legs buckled, and I fell to my knees. The song was inside me now, echoing in my mind, a maddening refrain that refused to let go. "You ended nothing," the voice hissed. "You only awakened what sleeps beneath." The faces in the fog reappeared, hundreds of them, each one screaming soundlessly, their agony palpable. The towering figure loomed closer, and I knew with gut-wrenching certainty that I had failed. The song would never stop. The fog would never leave. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was the figure leaning down, its face inches from mine. And then, through the unbearable noise, it whispered, "Now, you belong to the song."